Members, it's already time for us to start our meeting, and we've already formed a quorum. I now call the meeting to order. We'll go through the agenda items one by one, and questions will be taken from members. Information papers issued since the last meeting. Altogether, 4 papers were issued since the last meeting. The details are in the agenda. Before the meeting, we've not received any comment. Items for discussion at the next meeting. Our next meeting, regular meeting, will be held on the 10th of February, Monday, from 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. That will be after the Chinese New Year. The administration has proposed the following items for discussion. Our major concern, progress of work of the Committee on Free Kindergarten Education. I think this will be acceptable to all. And then I discussed with the Deputy Chairman. We propose to discuss non-joint university programs, admission system, and admission of non-local students to the UGC-funded postgraduate programs. I believe these are the concerns of members and the public. So the Deputy Chairman and I decided that we'll have 2 items for discussion only at the next meeting, so that we'll have ample time for discussion. So if there's no further comments, we'll proceed to the discussion items today. Dr. Kenneth Chan, I'm not objecting, but I'd like to remind you that I've submitted a letter to you on joint university programs admission system. So it's not just a question of JUPAS or non-JUPAS students. I'd like to include non-local students. Yes, point taken. In accordance with ROP 83A, members should declare any direct or indirect pecuniary interest before they speak. So first item for discussion today, startup loan for post-secondary education providers. Those who'd like to speak, please raise your hands. Please invite the officials to come in as soon as possible so that we can start. Government officials. Welcome, Undersecretary for Education, Mr. Kevin Young. Undersecretary, should I first invite you to speak on paper 284-01? Please brief us on the paper. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All along, the administration has launched a number of supportive measures to promote the sound development of the tertiary education. Interest-free loans are offered to assist non-profit-making tertiary institutions to improve their teaching facilities, enhance teaching quality, so as to support their students more. We now propose a loan of $30 million to HKCT Group Limited for the operation of full-time locally accredited post-secondary programs by the Hong Kong College of Technology, HKCT, and the proposed HKCT Institute of Higher Education, abbreviated CTIHE. For this $30 million is to pay for the partial renovation of a Ma On Shan vacated campus. There will be an auditorium, classrooms, laboratories, workrooms, library, restrooms, and so forth. Before September 2015, the renovation work will be completed such that the campus can be commissioned in 2015-16 so as to address the need of the Ho Man Tin campus of the college. We propose to submit the proposal to the Finance Committee on the 7th of February. Thank you. Thank you, Undersecretary. How many hands do I have? Dennis Kwok, Wong Kwok Heng, Ip Kian Yun, Long Kwok Hong. Any more? Seto? 5. Any more? Kenneth Chan? Four times 6 is 24. Any more hands? If we only have 6, I'll give each of you more time. 4 minutes per member, including questions and answers. Mr. Dennis Kwok. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Undersecretary, for your briefing. In Annex B of the paper, we have the vetting criteria. In the course of vetting, will the vetting panel discuss the curricula to be provided by the institution? For example, in Annex E, proposed programs are listed out. What about the contents and quality, particularly quality of the programs? Will these be among the vetting criteria? If so, Annex B is not clear enough. If these are also vetting criteria, I'd like to know the degree of consideration, that is, the depth of deliberation. Undersecretary, Mr. Chairman, for the self-financing tertiary institutions, they have to be vetted by an independent vetting committee. When considering loan applications, the details of programs will not be considered. That is, the quality will not be looked into. Whether or not a program should be offered has already been vetted by another committee. So, for the independent vetting committee, individual program quality will not be considered. Under this mechanism, you believe it does not have to repeat what the other committee has already done? Yes, Mr. Chairman. There's another vetting panel to consider the contents of the programs, who will be teaching the programs, where to conduct classes, etc. Whether or not the HKCT has the ability to do so, we already have a vetting mechanism. Mr. Wong Kwok Heng. Mr. Chairman, recently there was a motion debate in the Council on Tertiary Education. During that motion debate, I urged the administration to introduce vocational training in these programs. So for this loan fund, by way of loans, I'd like the administration to assist these tertiary institutions to assist their students to further their studies in terms of vocational education or higher education. There should be bridging programs or interfacing programs, and vocational counseling should be provided to assist them to join the workforce. In Hong Kong at the moment, we emphasize more the art subjects. As for science and technology subjects, there's room for improvement. We lack talents and professionals in science and technology. Take, for example, the construction industry. The business sector would like to import labor on the basis that Hong Kong lacks such talents and professionals. So we have to meet the needs of society and work hard in training talents. So the government should address such concerns. Any response? We very much agree with Mr. Wong. In our higher education amongst the various curricula, we'd like to provide a wide variety of programs for students to choose from. Apart from the conventional subjects and disciplines, in the Vocational Training Council, we also provide more programs in terms of science and technology and a variety of trades and industries. So for a number of self-financing curricula, in terms of students' choices, very often the students will consider the prospects of the trades and industries concerned in their subject choices. So here in this proposal, we'd like to allow the self-financing post-secondary education sector to provide better education services.
Next, Mr. Yip Kin Yun, Chairman. I have two questions. The first question is about the existing policy. Now, under the current policy, loan will be given to sponsoring bodies for renovation and installation of facilities to be repaid within 10 years. That means the costs are actually borne by students, and this will affect school fees to be charged in the future. So this is an obvious problem, as it poses a great burden on students. At the same time, we need to consider whether the organization, after getting the loan, will reduce the burden of students, because it might as well charge high school fees. The second question is about HKCT. I read up some information about HKCT over the past few years. Student admission had reduced. According to administration's information, the expected admission in 2010 was 625, but the actual admission was just 507, and the following year it dropped to 281. And the new campus to be constructed will accommodate around 1,000 students. So has there been any projection on supply and demand, whether there is an imbalance? Undersecretary, for self-financing courses or programs, they are self-financed, so there is no funding from government. So on the setting of school fees, these organizations must consider the costs of running these programs. They also need to consider whether there are similar programs in the market that compete with them, and also the affordability of students. So very often those institutes come up with a decision on the level of school fees based on a number of factors. For students having financial difficulties enrolled in these self-finance programs, we do have loan schemes to help them. As for the utilization of the future campus, maybe I'll invite someone from the Hong Kong College of Technology to explain a bit further. Dr. Chen, Principal, please. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Yip. Now, about the figures, in fact, that's the highest admission number permissible by the HKCAA-VQ. So the actual admission would definitely be lower than that maximum. And that's one thing different between our school and UGC-funded institutes. Also, we may have a different understanding on the figures. We refer it as the enrollment, that is the actual number of students currently enrolled in various programs, whereas the figure mentioned by Mr. Yip, some 200, actually referred to the intake that year. So the discrepancy might be due to the difference between intake and enrollment. All right, thank you. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, next, followed by Ms. Sit Ho. Mr. Leung Kwok Hong. Thank you, Chairman. About relocating the campus at Ho Man Tin, was it the campus for children of workers in Hong Kong? The former campus? No, it's very close. It's the New Method College that we're currently using. What about that campus I mentioned? It's used by another secondary school at the moment, and we use the portion which was formerly the primary school. So any relation with that school? We don't have a legal relation, so to speak. We're two distinct sponsoring bodies. What do you mean by that? Do you mean on friendly terms, or did the other school take part in it, or is it able to use your campus? Is it able to hire your venue, Dr. Chen? Well, it's difficult to define. We we are on friendly terms on many organizations. Well, you are on friendly terms with ELECTRICO, but you won't use ELECTRICO facilities as your campus, right? Is it a business relationship, or? Well, Mr. Leung Kwok Hong, are you trying to ask why they are able to use that school's former campus? Well, there is a history to that. Our original sponsoring body, we came from the same sponsoring body, but since we started the Hong Kong College of Technology, we started to have two sponsoring bodies. So the both schools came from the same origin. Now, my point is, I think there is a transfer of benefits involved. When I was small, when I was young, I went to different campuses and for meetings, and my mailbox very often received letters, enrollment letters from HKCT. I think it's totally unreasonable for government to fund you in this manner. Well, but now you can't change it anyway. So for the $30 million, I really think you should raise funds by yourself, since your business is so good. Because after the loan is given to you, it will become part of your assets. Well, if it's about the former workers' children's school, then I'm willing to give my approval. Otherwise, I won't, because if it's workers' children's school, definitely it's pro-communist. Now, HKCT is a non-profit making organization. As for the programs run by the Institute, it has passed the vetting process. Well, it's just save your speech. There are a lot of peripheral or fringe benefits. You get more votes. You can provide jobs. Right, Mr. Leung, please let Undersecretary answer. Now, $30 million only accounts for half of the cost of renovation, which is about $60 million, and they have to repay the money. Yes, next, Ms. Sit Ho. Chairman, regardless of the sponsoring bodies, I think the most important thing is that you need to have proper monitoring. Many private institutes or self-financed institutes are running pro-secondary courses or even degree courses, but there is inadequate monitoring on these organizations. And according to a report prepared by experts long ago, there should be a proper statutory body which is responsible for monitoring these organizations. Now, be it higher diploma courses or degree courses, they should be 75% of the funds should come from public money. Whereas all along the government is encouraging private operators. Now, are there any criteria, for example, standards for libraries, for computer rooms, etc.? Now, Chairman, I once went to the Polytechnic University's building for sub-degree students, and even the canteen was so crowded. There was no space for students to have after-school discussions, and these facilities are costly. And just like Lingnan University, those post-secondary courses enrolled more students than it could afford, and in the end some students had to have their lessons in industrial buildings. So on the one hand, you encourage private operators to run programs. On the other hand, you have no authority to monitor and standardize their courses. Under Secretary, we have discussed with members before on monitoring the quality of private institutes, and in the past we have done a lot. For example, through enhancing transparency, we disseminate information. As for an independent statutory body, we have been discussing with the vetting body and the self-finance post-secondary committee recently commissioned a consultant to look at overseas experience in proper management or best practices of private post-secondary institutes, and perhaps I'll defer to my colleague to say more about our work. As mentioned by Under Secretary, in fact, we have taken a gradual approach by implementing a series of measures to enhance quality assurance. As mentioned just now, the HKCAAV, Chairman, I think I don't have enough time. I only have 4 minutes. Just tell me whether you can set up a statutory body within 2 years. Thank you, Ms. Ho. There is a vision, as mentioned by Sid Ho, that is whether we should have an independent quality assurance body, and we have taken a gradual approach. For example, we have a liaison group on quality assurance. We want to ensure that best practices are adopted by various quality assurance organizations. And in terms of accreditation, we also have made some progress. A new working group is now being formed, comprising members from UGC and other bodies, so that there can be external audits on a regular basis. Next, Dr. Kenneth Chan, followed by Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Chan, you are my senior schoolmate, so I need to make it clear and declare our relationship, since this involves a funding application. Last time, Chairman, we received another application from Hang Seng School of Management for the renovation of campus, and last time there was a detailed PowerPoint presentation, there was a detailed plan before us, but now I have read this paper very thoroughly, and yet I am puzzled. I only see the verbal promise or the promises of programs that will be run, but can you give us a more concrete business plan, because we don't see these figures? So please provide such figures afterwards, because this will be an important consideration in the funding application. And Under Secretary Mr. Yeung, when we talk about funding application for development of school campus and running of programs, etc. Now, can you guarantee that these the Queen's Hill site will not be acquired? Otherwise, there is a conflict. On the one hand, you ask for funding for self-financed courses. On the other hand, you just take back the site. Now, on the 30 million for renovation, anything to supplement, Dr. Chen? Because he prefers PowerPoint, but you don't have it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chan, for his questions. We actually have plenty information, but we don't know we have to submit them. In fact, I can inform Dr. Chan that for the renovation of the whole campus, we'd like to create an environment that is conducive to self-studies by students. And altogether, we have 5 colleges and institutions. We understand that competition is fierce, so when necessary, we can do it. Your campus is quite big, 7,000 square meters. That's why this level of cost. Next, what about Queen's Hill, Under Secretary? For Queen's Hill, all along, we view that as a big site. And from our viewpoint, it's also a very precious asset. Even now, we're still studying its long-term development direction. Therefore, for the moment, I have nothing to add. I'd like to quickly say something about the Hang Sang case. Last time, we were discussing hostels as well as a new building. Mr. Chairman, you may recall that last time we showed you a photo about its location. And this time we're talking about an existing building and we're only talking about renovation. Yes, renovation. I did not specially require the HKCT to produce a PowerPoint presentation. In future, if necessary, I can ask them to do so. Mr. Chairman, if the administration really wants to support HKCT, it should ask it to give us all the details. Otherwise, they may be criticized for transfer of benefits. Dr. Helena Wong. Mr. Chairman, the 5th item on the list of outstanding issues is precisely about the governance and regulation of the self-financing post-secondary sector. You should set a date for discussing that item. Then we don't need to have this fragmented discussion. I do not agree that we should adopt such a fragmented approach in our discussions. And under CAP 320, the HKCT is to be registered. Well, CAP 320 is flawed. There are no guidelines on students and teachers, representatives, so they should amend the ordinance first. Without amending the ordinance first, they're now asking people to register under it. Secondly, for the self-financing institutions, the degree of transparency is 0. Nobody knows how the money is spent. If we lend them a sum of money for the construction of campuses, etc., in the coming years, will students be bearing the debts? That means for those students who get enrolled in the initial years of the institutions, they'll have to pay more. and thereafter the students pay less. You say they're non-profit making. Now, for these self-financing institutions registered under Cap 320, students and teachers don't know how the money is spent. Members of the public don't know what they're doing. So first of all, for transparency in financial management, you should make improvement. And then the Education Bureau will not be able to regulate them. Take, for example, the Tonghua College. There's such a big scandal. The students want to ask the bureau director, but they're rejected, and they'd like to see the permanent secretary, still they're rejected. Well, whether or not the loans are for HKCT or which institutions, there's no monitoring and regulation thereafter in terms of institutional governance and financial management. Our population is diminishing. We already have a crisis in secondary schools. In future, the number of students who get enrolled in these tertiary institutions or higher education institutions will drop. How will the government cope with that? Well, Undersecretary, please try to provide answers as quickly as possible. Now, first of all, the HKCT is a non-profit making body. We only offer loans to non-profit making bodies. You're correct. Just now, our colleagues already said how. Well, our colleague said something about the regulation and monitoring of self-financing institutions. We cannot achieve everything overnight. We'll adopt a gradual approach in regulating them. We cannot stop these institutions from organizing new programs. We cannot stop offering them loans. We cannot do so. We can only further monitor and regulate them, and would like to assist these institutions in providing higher education programs. Mr. Tam Yu-chung, I have to declare interest because I'm an honorary president of the Board of Governors of the HKCT. Some of our colleagues were actually politically lopsided. They mentioned transfer of benefits, for example. Those are really far-fetched remarks. Now, what is the objective of subsidizing these programs? Is because the number of places in subvented institutions is limited. But there's a huge demand for such places. So the government said, all right, if there are bodies that are capable of running self-financing institutions, then they will have to recover costs by way of tuition fees, or else there must be subsidies from somewhere. Now, our colleagues seem to be suggesting that these self-financing institutions are making profits. Well, can you focus on this startup loan? Don't digress. Now, we're talking about a deserted campus. This is a big institution. The renovation cost will be very high. Just look at the renovation costs, building repair and maintenance costs, etc., etc. You all know that all these are costly. Now, the administration has to overcome a number of hurdles before getting this $30 million approved. Now, these are loans. They have to be repaid. Don't say that the school principals will pocket the profits. Well, don't smear these non-profit making institutions. Now, this $30 million have to be repaid. It's for renovation only, but the total renovation cost is far above this sum of money. Next, Mr. Ma Fong Kwok. Mr. Chairman, I did not intend to speak, but after listening to colleagues and their questions, I'd also like to present my views. In my opinion, self-financing institutions have to be improved. Students have to further their studies. They should get placement assistance, institutional management, program quality, etc. can be further improved. But just now our colleagues have politicized the issue by bringing in the background of a particular institution. Now we should only study whether or not the institution is reasonable in offering these programs and whether or not the programs are up to standard. I don't fully understand the HKCT, but I do understand it to a certain extent. I understand that its programs are quite good. There are also social engagement or engagement in social activities as well. So the HKCT has been recognized by students as a good institution. I do understand their difficulties. For those institutions are operating well, if their objectives are good, if they have a good vision, then we should support them. We should support the policy. So I personally support this proposed loan. In future, we can further discuss how we can further improve these institutions, how they can serve their students better. And we need more policies on the part of the government. So I support the proposal. So much for this item. The government intends to go to the Finance Committee on the 7th of February. From what I heard just now, the mainstream stance of members is that this panel supports the proposal. Mr. Chairman, I oppose the proposal. Yes, please put on record, Dr. Helena Wong opposes the proposal. Next item on the agenda, review on the implementation of territory-wide system assessment. Under Secretary, do you have some more colleagues coming in? Well, I can start first. All right. Paper 284-03. Mr. Young, Under Secretary, please introduce the paper to us. And who would like to speak? Helena Wong, Ip Kin Wat Yun. Under Secretary, you can now speak. Mr. Chairman, assessment is an essential part of education. Appropriate assessment can provide useful information to teachers and students to understand the progress of students, their strengths and weaknesses, to improve pedagogy and further studies. TSA is a low-risk assessment. It's not to assess the results of individual students. The results will not be announced. Before the completion of 12 years of education, TSA is the only mechanism to provide objective assessment in P3, P6, and S4. And S3, sorry. It is essential on the strengths and weaknesses of students and schools' needs for improvement. The assessment will be able to provide assessment results, and the school can trace the performance of the students and improve teaching effectiveness. In society, assessment has been very much drilling-oriented. We'd like to make an improvement. In 2013, we broadly consulted the relevant stakeholders while retaining TSA as a core function and alleviating the pressure or burden on teachers and students. We'll have to strike a balance. So, we would like to conduct the assessment on alternate years, and the 3 subjects alone will not be announced, and the quantification aspect will be deleted to avoid unnecessary comparisons among schools and to reduce the pressure of frequent drills. Teachers and parents have a misunderstanding about TSA, so we'll enhance our communication with them and introduce how TSA data can be made use of. After listening to members, we may revise our proposals and announce the new TSA arrangements in the first quarter of this year.
Okay, on to question and answers. Dr. Helena Wong has moved the motion, seconded by Mr. Yip Kin Yuen. I believe this is now in front of you. We will reserve some time to deal with this motion. Who would like to speak first? Dr. Helena Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have a motion in a moment. Now, today, the administration says that it will be subject to review, but after review, it seems that this is not going to be abolished. Concerning the performance, you won't disclose it. Sorry, Dr. Helena Wong, is 4 minutes questions and answers included. So I think you have not responded to the concerns expressed by students, teachers, and parents. In particular, for TSA for primary 3, we know that primary students start doing drillings as early as in P1. Can you make sure that just by not disclosing attainment rates, there's such kind of distortion will disappear? Under Secretary. Now, our review looked at a number of issues, including the one mentioned by Dr. Helena Wong. The question or the problem is not with TSA per se, but rather for some schools and parents, their perception on TSA scores and the unnecessary drillings and comparisons. The question is not on TSA per se. The data from TSA, if used appropriately, can help schools and teachers. Now, Chairman, the question is, you want to collect the data. That means we need to have TSA, and whenever you have this assessment, parents will go crazy. They would force their children to have drillings, and also schools will run extra classes. So if you can't curb this, if you have continue to have TSA, how can this problem be resolved? And we see the API advising that children should have playtime, and it's really nonsense. If you don't abolish TSA, you'll continue to put pressure on children. This will continue to exist. This well, we see an overall comparison of scores and attainment rates, and that leads to excessive drilling. We think that by not disclosing attainment rates, the schools will not put too much focus on the performance, but rather look at the data objectively in analyzing the strengths and weaknesses and adjust their teaching and learning, which will be conducive to students learning a great deal. I cannot give this undertaking to Dr. Helena Wong or everyone at this moment that this will this phenomenon will not exist, but we hope that through more explanation there will be improvements. Now, it doesn't mean that after introducing this new arrangement we will do nothing else. We will review it regularly. Now, TSA was introduced in 2004, and you have been able to track the students' performance throughout the primary school to secondary school. So you already have sufficient data at hand. Why can't you suspend TSA for the time being and analyze the data in detail? In short, yes, it has been done for over a decade, but this is the first year that we have TSA for P3, and actually every year the data is used by schools in helping teachers and students. Mr. Ip Kin-yun. Now, we all agree that TSA has a far greater impact than other previous public examinations we had. It's really beyond our imagination. We have graduated a long time ago, and yesterday a primary school teacher published an article with his observation in a newspaper. Schools started extra classes, tuition classes for students on TSA even as early as in August. And they had a lot of homeworks. They were standardized, and also mathematics, etc., all for taking TSA. There are over 10 points there. I won't read them out. Now, the situation is dire. So the Education Bureau is suggesting two proposals. I welcome both, but I wonder if they have enough teeth. One is not disclosing BC attainment rates for primary schools. The other is removing TSA from the key performance measures. However, as you can see from the paper, even if the attainment rates are not disclosed, you can calculate them on your own. And school sponsoring bodies and other stakeholders are actually very interested in ranking the schools. In the past, the Education Bureau was actually the main culprit who started it. So this cannot eradicate the shortcomings. So this is a bigger problem. We have collected so much data, but we don't see the benefits brought to teaching and learning. On the contrary, we see serious shortcomings. So can you have major reform instead? And the Secretary. Well, I will defer to my colleague to say something more about the pros of TSA. But on the whole, I don't think we should abolish TSA simply because of this alienation phenomenon. We believe that we can improve the system. TSA has its value, and I think it's worthwhile for us to implement our proposals. And the shortcomings of TSAs have widely been recognized and discussed by the community, and we believe by introducing these proposals we will be able to make much improvement. Now, I think teachers under our new arrangements can focus on the teaching, and as for whether attainment rates can be calculated on the schools by the schools ourselves, well, basically we are not going to include the BC attainment rates in our report, also the territory-wide score. Deputy Chairman, I understand that there is a attainment rate for each answer, so you can just sum it up to get the overall picture if you spend a little more time. So the mechanism still exists, which can facilitate the ranking of schools by some, and it still exerts great pressure on schools and teachers. I look forward to a more major revamp of the system, including abolition of TSA and other things. You can look at the PTU's suggestions, in fact. All right, thank you. Anyone else for the first round? Starry Lee, Wong Kwok Hing, and Wu Chi Wai. Ms. Starry Lee. The DAB, as mentioned in the motion debate last time, had this position towards TSA. We don't agree to abolishing TSA at this stage because we believe the Education Bureau should have a tool in assessing the progress of teaching and learning among schools. Whether it has resulted in alienation or variance, there are discussions. Now, first of all, school-to-school comparison is not desirable. However, schools should conduct internal review based on the TSA results because it's important in improving the students' performance. So after reading the report, can this goal be achieved? Can the schools look at their results in terms of teaching over the years? And I don't think we should deal with these major motions within just a short period of time. We have this motion tabled and like to seek views from the mover and the seconder, Dr. Helena Wong and Mr. Yip Kin Yun. Now, I've heard from both of them. Their stance is that the TSA should be abolished, but the motion doesn't say so. The motion actually suggests that the shortcomings of TSA should be eradicated. So if it's about abolishing TSA, I think it's premature. So I'd like to ask more about the motion itself. Any response from Undersecretary? I'll ask PS to say something more about the use of TSA score. Based on the BC attainment rates, the schools can review the scores and consider how to improve their teaching. Chairman, I still have time. I have a suggestion for Education Bureau. As I shared with members previously, as a parent, I feel that there has been excessive drilling on TSA. But in fact, parents didn't know what TSA is for until a very late stage. So I think there should be active promotion on your part, explaining to parents that basically TSA doesn't affect the assessment on individual students. Of course, I understand schools are very concerned about TSA because it's concerned with school level reports. But parents themselves don't know what TSA results will be used for, and many parents are worried that the result will be used for secondary school place allocation. So what else can be done, and what have you done in the past? Now, I very much agree that there should be publicity. Apart from adjusting our system, we will have a stronger communication with schools and parents, explaining to them the whole purpose of TSA and how the data will be used and how students could be helped. And I'll defer to my colleague. Yes, we have explained to parents on a regular basis, and perhaps we could do it more frequently in greater detail. And we must go to schools, and we must work with schools. That's most important. Next, Mr. Wong Kwok Hing. Chairman. Now, for TSA, a review has been done on how to improve the system, and the LegCo just had a debate on the same subject which has been carried. So I wonder if this is premature, if we had a deal with this motion today, since the Council has just carried a motion on the same topic. And just now I heard that the Education Bureau has responded to the concerns by reviewing the system and there'll be a further review in the middle of this year to enhance TSA or have other arrangements. So I think against this backdrop, the Education Bureau can proceed with the review first and follow up on the result of the review. I think this is more appropriate. My question is, what does the Bureau intend to do in the first half of this year? For example, how to consult teachers and parents, and also feedback from students so that their educational needs can be better met. I'd like the Bureau to respond, please. Bureau Director, thank you. Chairman, thank you, Mr. Wong. I think over the past we have conducted a number of focus group meetings. Some were conducted by the HKEAA, some were conducted by us. We discussed with stakeholders on TSA, and we also worked with secondary and primary school teachers and principals, and that's the result of our consultation.
And today we've listened to members' views. We'll take members' views back for consideration. In future, on the basis of these views, if we need to further adjust our proposals, we'll consult the relevant stakeholders. You've all heard of the impact of TSA on students. If possible, we would like to launch enhancement measures in the short term to address the drilling-oriented issue. Mr. Leung Kwok-hung, you raise your stick. Do you mean you want to speak? I have to conclude this item at 5:45 p.m. and I have to handle Dr. Helena Wong's motion. Wu Chi Wai Leung Kwok-hung, Leung Yu Chung, 5 more members will be behind schedule, then also Dr. Fernando Chung, so 5 members altogether. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. Mr. Chairman, such examinations will cause schools and parents to drill their students. Schools and parents will use the TSA results to choose schools for their students. And schools will also make use of TSA to attract better students. So in this dissimulation phenomenon or alienation phenomenon, I'd like to say that particularly in the primary stage, you should take on all students. You shouldn't attach weightings to students. However, this mechanism is to cause the students to run, and students will be competing for good students. So there is a conflict here. So I hope that you can abolish all comparable indicators. I think the Bureau should consider what's happening. How can you avoid schools going along that direction? Under the existing system, theoretically, all schools will have to adopt the same curricula. By and large, they should be given similar resources. So why should there be such huge variations? So you have to study the roles and functions of TSA. Otherwise, all reviews, all remedial efforts will not produce much effects. You have to explain to the public our education system. We have the secondary school entrance examination, which was considered as bad, and then we have the TSA, etc., etc. Still, we have problems. So I'd like to have some answers from the Bureau. While enhancing and perfecting our education system, what indicators should we set for our schools? And why can't our schools take on all students, irrespective of their competencies? Mr. Chairman, all along TSA results should not be made public. TSA data are for internal assessment only. Of course, some schools have been competing amongst themselves, maybe under the same school sponsor, and then some schools may try to use TSA results to attract better students. But these are not the original intentions of TSA. So we'd like to withdraw those TSA data that could be used by schools to publicize themselves. And we would like TSA results to tell us in advance the difficulties facing students. For example, how many students are up to standard, how many are not. And then schools will be able to take care of certain groups of students such that the differences in abilities among students can be addressed. Yes, schools have to keep TSA data confidential. However, some school sponsoring bodies have more than one school under them. So, TSA data had been leaked. So please pay attention to that phenomenon. Mr. Leung Kok-hung? Mr. Young, why don't you organize the World Cup, which is eliminating in nature? Schools are different. Schools should teach and nurture all persons and to turn them into useful persons. First of all, can you ban schools from leaking TSA data? Should you not legislate? If there are consequences to leakages, then the persons concerned will be scared and deterred from leaking the information. You say that TSA data should only be used as a tool to assess students and then teach them accordingly. But that's not happening. You should legislate to the effect that whoever leaks TSA data should be punished. That's number one. If you introduce such a piece of legislation, Intellectual will definitely support you, will vote for you. Number two, the penalty should be that once there's a leakage, the subvention that the school concerned will get is to decrease. And now you are categorizing students, but not teaching them all. Some categories of students will be left out. So will you put some effort in addressing this alienation issue? Well, we've actually been working very hard to address the problem. We've now come up with some solutions. Rather than stopping them to leak the data, we would like to withdraw those data that can be used for direct comparison. As for penalty, if the amount of subvention is to be reduced, the ultimate victims will be the students. So we won't think along that line. Under this proposal, schools will not be able to tell the public their ranking amongst all schools in Hong Kong. And examination scripts or questions will not be leaked anymore. If there's no longer any comparison, if there's no longer any alienation, then the problems will go. Say if a student is less competent or less able in a certain respect, the school will try to enhance the ability of the student in that regard. I don't quite agree. Lam Tai Fai is also a school manager. Well, if the government is able to do what it has just said, very good. But in a year's time, if your proposal fails, who will be held liable? Is it Eddie Ng or Kevin Young? Well, the bureau director will, of course, be held liable. Dr. Fernando Chung, Mr. Chairman, we spent a great deal of effort to abolish all sorts of public examinations. The secondary school entrance examination, the aptitude test, the elimination examinations at S3, blah, blah, blah. Now, public exams at P6 and S3 have been abolished, and even the S5 examination has been replaced by DSE. Still, our students are pressurized. In fact, the situation has deteriorated. Previously, our pupils only got their first assessment at P6. Now, it's lowered to P3. And then what about CEM, so to speak, that is Chinese, English, and mathematics? If you want to conduct any assessment, you have to set standards first. The DSE is also a form of assessment. Why is it necessary to have this assessment at P3? Well, let's not talk about other issues. You just abolish this assessment at P3 first. And individual examination questions can produce an aggregate score. The formula will remain the same. There'll still be internal comparison within the same school sponsor. Teachers and students will continue to be pressurized. I really don't understand why you need an assessment at P3 level. So you have to abolish that first. And then you have to see what functions TSA is playing. You should abolish the whole TSA. Mr. Young, we think assessment is necessary at P3. For child development, differences or variations may widen between P3 and P4. So we have to discover what deficiencies a student has. Otherwise, it will be too late when it comes to P6. In Canada or Australia, for example, they also conduct a similar assessment at a particular age. So, to conduct some basic assessment at a particular age is nothing invented by Hong Kong. It's not invented by Hong Kong. Other jurisdictions are doing the same. Well, if schools are to compare questions one by one, it won't be very useful. will explain to individual schools and school sponsors. As Ms. Tari Lee said, we should do more publicity about TSA so that schools understand the actual purpose of TSA. We're not using TSA for the purpose of elimination. We just want to assess the different performances and abilities in students so that we can do something to help them. Perhaps you can tell us, ever since you've got this TSA, in what way have you been assisted by TSA? Time's up for you. Mr. Kokhim, Mr. Chairman, in recent times, this panel has received too many motions. Many of the motions involve very broad issues. And sometimes, even if a motion was carried in this panel, nothing substantial actually came forth. Well, the panel is to monitor the government. If there are any deficiencies on the part of the government in terms of government policies, we should advise them. It seems that in recent times, we got motions at every meeting.
Now, as about this motion, as Starry Lee put it, we already had a motion debate on TSA, and I understand there are views that TSA should be abolished. Now, yes, we should review TSA, but I'm also a member of the sector. If you say that we should have no assessment at all, this is not possible. The problem is how we can ensure that students will not be subject to unreasonable pressure because of the assessment, so that there won't be excessive drilling. And yet we can't actually do away with assessment. We need assessment to find out who can pursue the studies, who cannot. We need to have a system. Just like in other jurisdictions, they also have mechanisms to ensure that they can pick out the best. So I don't agree that TSA is used to exert extra pressure on students. Now, about the motion, there should be an extensive review within 6 months. There should be a consultation to eradicate the shortcomings of TSA, to avoid these education systems being distorted. Well, these are specific comments, and yet when the member spoke just now, she talked about abolishing TSA. So if we see motions like these every time, I find it difficult to accept. And my suggestion is indeed that the government should avoid putting extra pressure on students, but assessments are necessary, and TSA should be continued instead of having this polarized view of either keeping it or abolishing it. I can't agree to this motion. Thank you, Chairman. Anything to supplement, Under Secretary? Yes, I agree to the members' views. We have thought through this issue when we prepared the paper. We acknowledge the value of TSA, and we want to avoid undesirable use of data obtained from TSA, and we think our proposal should be able to achieve that. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Now, the assessment aims at finding out the learning differences between students. But I want to clarify this point. Are you talking about students having different learning abilities within the same class or within the same school or between schools, because it's very different. As a teacher, if we talk about discrepancies between students, among students in the same class, I think teachers more or less have some idea. If you talk about a set of standards for assessment, then we thank you, but we don't need to have a territory-wide assessment. Teachers can conduct the assessment themselves so that teachers can understand the students' abilities within the class and how much, for example, a student is lagging behind the norm. But if you extend it to territory-wide to be conducted by the administration, you're not looking actually at the learning differences between students, but rather between schools. And that's why members have been criticizing, and also parents, teachers have been criticizing the system, because there is a comparison between schools and it affects students' enrollment and future development of schools. So if this is only for assessing learning differences between students, we welcome the assessment. Please give us the data, give us the assessment tool, and we teachers can conduct the assessment themselves. We don't need to exert pressure on students. It can be done through day-to-day learning. Under Secretary, I think both can achieve the same purpose. If you look at the attainment rates for a school, you can see how many students are above par, how many are below, and within the same school, the schools can also look at the performance. For example, the school has omitted part of the learning material, and the students, as a result, did not perform well in that one, and students and teachers would know. Now, for a certain grade or a certain class, teachers would have a perfect idea what questions are involved. Say, I may teach the sum of 1 plus 1 equals 2. So as teachers doing the teaching themselves, they definitely would have an idea. If you want to compare the performance with the norm, of course I would know. So the question is, as far as your purpose is concerned, are you trying to assess the discrepancies among schools or among students in the same class? Chairman, both can be done. Now, one of the things is that we can look at a particular question and the performance of a particular school comparing to other schools in a territory. That means it's a comparison between the performance of one school with other schools. So that's the source of the pressure, because the schools don't want to fare worse than other schools, and they exert pressure on teachers and then teachers onto students. I'll defer to PS. In fact, on a yearly basis, there might be variations among schools. For example, because of mobility of teachers, and also students' performance vary from year to year. And this is for schools to review their situations and make improvements. I'm sorry, Mr. Leung Yiu-chung, I need to deal with Dr. Helena Wong's motion now. I won't read it out. It's in front of you. It's been tabled, and we have had a discussion. Please let me finish. We have debated on it. I won't allow members to debate on this motion again. And I agree with Ms. Dari Lee. When Dr. Helena Wong and when Deputy Chairman spoke just now, the wordings they used were different from the content of the motion, including the fact that they asked for abolition of TSA. So I will give 1 minute for Dr. Helena Wong to respond and another minute for Yip Kin Yuen to respond, followed by a response by Undersecretary. I make remarks from in my personal capacity, but this is actually from the Democratic Party. It's starting from line 2. This panel urges the administration to consult teachers, parents, and students and conduct extensive review and consultation within 6 months on the TSA, on whether it should be abolished or improved. Now, just now a member focused on abolition of TSA, but actually we can have partial abolition. For example, we just abolish TSA for primary 3. That's why we need to have an extensive consultation. We don't have a preconceived result. We don't know the result beforehand, unlike some other political parties. We can't foresee the result. So the outcome could be that it should be kept or abolished or improved. Deputy Chairman, I agree completely with Dr. Helena Wong's comments. We are not asking for one particular thing, but the aim is very clear. We need to eradicate the TSA's shortcomings to avoid distortion of the education system. That is why we are asking for a review. That's the purpose of our motion. 30 seconds for Starry Lee. Now, Mrs. Regina Yip raised her hands a number of times. We have exceeded the speaking time limit. I can only give you 1 minute. We should proceed to the vote after that. Thank you, Chairman. I just managed to arrive in time. Now, I've met with some teachers, and I understand that some questions in the TSA for primary 3 or primary 6 too difficult. I'd like to ask Dr. Helena Wong what's meant by distortion or alienation of education. Well, I won't allow the two of you to argue here. Now, frankly, I don't oppose a review, but if you say alienation of or differentiation in the education system, well, different people have different abilities. Some may become nurses, some may become teachers or doctors. It's not a problem that we have alienation of education, Mr. Reddy. I heard the clarification from the mover and seconder, but according to their comments, DAB are not going to support their motion. We believe the proposals should be implemented, be followed by a review on sometime after its operation. Undersecretary, very quickly, consultation with stakeholders. Now, these are set out in para 6 and 7. This is the proposal as a result of consulting stakeholders. All right, thank you. Let's put this to a vote. Those in favor of Dr. Helena Wong's motion, please raise their hands. Keep your hand up so that the clerk can write down your names. All right, have the names written down, please.
1 2 1 2 3 4 5 2 4 6 3 4 5 6 7 幾多個？ 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9個。
9 of them. All right, keep your hands up. Those in favor of the motion, 9 members. Those against, please raise your hands. Keep your hands up, please. Very controversial. Keep your hand up. 9. Similarly, 9 members. Those against, please put up your hands. Don't put your hands down until I ask you to. All right. Those abstained, please raise your hands. Yes, just say you're abstaining. 1 or 2? Mrs. Regina Yip included 2. And Mr. Michael Tin. Mr. Michael Tin is not a member of this panel. No, he is. He is in this term. He is an honorable member of this panel. Will I be given 5 minutes to speak? I'm sorry, time is up. So according to the rules of procedure, as we have 9 members in favor of the motion and 9 members against, this motion is not carried. Next item on the agenda: review on the policy of direct subsidy scheme schools. Would those who would like to speak, please raise your hand and keep your hands up. And meanwhile, let's invite the administration to come in. We need to keep watch of the time, so please ask the administration to come in as soon as possible. Please let the secretariat jot it down first. Just keep your hands up, please. Keep your hands up. Please help the secretariat. Would Secretary please get ready for your presentation? This is paper CB bracket 4284/1314 bracket 04. I think many members would like to speak on this subject, so please be as brief as possible, Secretary, so that more time can be reserved for members to ask questions or give comments. And I'd like to mention that Ms. Sit-ho has amended Dr. Kenneth Chan's motion, and we need to deal with them. So I am going to extend this meeting to 6:45. Over to you, Secretary. After the Secretary has spoken, I will read out the names of members.
Secretary, Mr. Chairman, we've prepared a paper to report to members the roles and functions of the Direct Subsidy Scheme, DSS, and the schools under the policy. The DSS aims to inject more variety into our school system and give parents more choices. We can understand the implementation of the policy from 3 aspects. First of all, there are 74 DSS schools at the moment with different backgrounds. 40% are brand new DSS schools, 30% are former subvented schools, and the remaining 30% from other categories, like the board place schools. These schools collect a low tuition fee, remission, scholarships, etc. offered, amounting to 30% of the overall expenditure of the schools. Secondly, DSS schools have their own education concepts and room for maneuvering, providing a wide variety of education services to students. Some schools have developed their own characteristic curricula, like those in music, visual arts, etc., to address the different talents and aptitude of students. And some schools mainly serve ethnic minority students. Thirdly, the DSS is an open system to allow students with different social background to study in them. That is, to give more choices to parents. There must be school remission schemes as well as scholarships for DSS students. The usage rate has been rising. In 2010-2011 is $150 million. 2011-12, $190 million. And many needy students have benefited from such fee remission and scholarships. Diversity in roles and functions has been attained. And in order to uphold the roles and functions of the policy, we'll continue to listen to stakeholders and continuously review the policy. Let me read out those members who would like to speak. Tommy Chung, Sato, Leung Yu Chung, Deputy Chairman, Leung Kwok Hong, Fernando Chung, Helena Wong, Kenneth Chan, Ma Fong Kwok, Ip Kwok Him, Regina Ip, Starry Lee, Michael Tan, Wong Kwok Hing. Have I left out anybody? It seems that you've not been following the order of those members who've raised their hands, well, I just follow the list passed to me by the clerk. Sometimes because of visual variation, we may have seen different hands. I have so many members for the first round anymore. If not, I'll draw a line there. I have to handle the motion as well. I believe members will speak on the motion, so I won't particularly launch a debate on the motions and amendment. I hope that we can finish our discussion within the scheduled time limit. Mr. Tommy Chung, 3 minutes, questions and answers. Well, it doesn't matter even if they don't answer my questions. Well, give us your invaluable advice. First of all, I have to declare interest, Mr. Chairman. I'm a school manager of a DSS school. You see, we have to register as school managers. So I'd like to tell you where I'm from. All along, this DSS school has been a subvented school for decades, or even up to a century. I think members have to understand that DSS schools have their own difficulties and risks. And Mr. Chairman, you're also the supervisor of a DSS school. A DSS school is completely different from a subvented school. So long as you have students, so long as the class size does not drop below the threshold, you will have to hire the same number of teachers. But tuition fee is collected on a per capita basis. So the risks facing DSS schools are huge. I don't want colleagues to have any misconception about parents' complaints. Say if a parent says that I don't have sufficient income, my son is very clever, but he cannot enter a DSS school. Now you have to look clearly at the picture. Look at the students whom we've enrolled. Of course, we enroll the best students. They come for written examinations as well as interviews. And eventually, if you discover that parents don't have the need, what will you do? We shouldn't be discriminated against. We shouldn't be asked to reserve certain places for those students who have not attained good academic results. I don't really want an answer from the secretary. Even before the handover, at the time of Young Kai-yin, were persuaded by the government to run DSS schools. They shouldn't change the rule of the game casually and randomly. It's not necessary to effect any changes. You should not hastily change the system just because certain parties fail to attain something. Ms. Sito, well, the merit of DSS is to have diversification, which happens in your school, Mr. Chairman, and my school. And DSS schools have flexibility so they can address the individual problems of individual students. Well, elitism is the problem that we've all witnessed. Many traditional famous schools don't want to be controlled by the government, so they gradually changed into DSS schools. but the assistance offered by the government has not been sufficient. So if DSS schools want to improve, for example, the teacher-student ratio, facilities, etc., they don't have sufficient money to do so. I'm not satisfied with this paper, which is only addressing the problems raised by the Director of Audit in relation to fee remission, scholarships, etc. But how can they provide more choices to the students? How can they provide better education for the students? The paper fails to address those problems. That's why I've moved amendments to Dr. Kenneth Chan's motion. Now, subvented schools should not be in a disadvantaged position, and parents must not opt for a particular category of schools first. So you should reduce the disparity between the two categories of schools. And then subvented schools do not have sufficient resources from the government. Therefore, they cannot improve, for example, the teacher-student ratio. Therefore, the resources allocated to subvented schools should be increased so that they can provide better education. Thirdly, when some famous schools want to change to DSS, the schools, the parents, the teachers, etc., are not duly regulated. So school sponsors should be given adequate guidelines so that they know what to follow. I won't dwell on the details of my amendments, but I have to say that we've actually formed a consensus on these amendments. Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Flexibility, diversity are the merits of DSS, as Mr. To said. But the most important point is that DSS schools are not so regulated by the Education Bureau. Why can't the same be applied to subvented schools? Why should you hugely advocating for DSS schools? If DSS schools are so good, should we not review our subvented schools to see what shortcomings there are or what inadequacies there are? It's because of the constraints set by the Education Bureau that subvented schools have not been able to perform as well as they would like to. For the sake of holistic education, DSS schools may have emphasized on moral education. Subvented schools may be subject to huge pressure in that regard, and they face the hazard of being closed. So you should support subvented schools better. Well, DSS schools performed better. That's what you said. So what you're actually saying is that schools that are not so much controlled by you perform better than those schools that are subject to more control by you. Well, all along, you've been protecting subvented schools, but now you want to drive them away. It's tantamount to privatizing the schools. That is marketization, commercialization. Well, Bureau Director, don't you feel ashamed? You are managing subvented schools, but you're now telling us that subvented schools are not performing as well as DSS schools. Any response, Bureau Director? Some subvented schools perform very well. Some DSS schools perform very well. Under different systems and different environment, schools have been pursuing their respective characteristics. Let me say this, many subvented schools have performed very well. Well, many subvented schools have their own characteristics, but you would like to close them. Mr. Ip Kin Yun, Mr. Leung Yu Chung made a very good point. Subvented schools are just like the sons of the government. DSS schools are taking care of themselves. They are not the sons of the government. For this motion, be it DSS schools, subvented schools, or government schools, they should be treated equally. They need to provide quality education. They need resources on which they depend for the provision of quality education. So government schools and subvented schools should get sufficient resources. That's the first and foremost point. And for schools in the course of conversion, we very often receive complaints about them. The stakeholders, teachers, and parents have expressed their worries, and they are worried that their views will not be handled fairly and reasonably. For example, teachers have complained about questionnaires that require a signature from the respondent. And then some parents complained that after filling out questionnaires, they had been disturbed by certain parties. So in vetting applications, how will the administration ensure that stakeholders can freely and autonomously express their views?
Yes, thank you for the question. When we look at the application for an aided school to switch to a DSS school, we look at a number of things. Now, on one of the things we look at is consulting stakeholders. Now, there should be proper consultation with stakeholders, because views might be divergent, and the schools should therefore respond to their concerns and to respond in order to allay their concerns. When we received the application, we would consider whether the way their concerns were duly addressed. All right, Mr. Leung Kwok-hong, what's meant by alienation? It means a particular thing develops to something opposite to itself. So, Mrs. Regina Yip, you should understand that this is turning something good into something bad. So this is why we have this movie, The Alien. I have a different view. This is not alienation. From the start, it has all been about schools run by school sponsoring bodies, and definitely there would be elitism, elitist schools. So, Mrs. Yip, your question is superfluous. The key is to set up elitist schools for their children. So my view is very simple. For DSS schools, if they want to set up schools like these, they should find their own land and raise their own funds. They should not get anything from the government. and if it's for charitable purposes, they can enroll the top 30% students so that some top students could get in. The biggest problem is that we give funding to direct subsidy schools. Education is public policy. Public money is involved. So, Secretary, please tell me, is there alienation or something else? Secretary, starting from 1991, DSS schools have been fulfilling its role and functions. There have been different types of schools. If you for DSS schools, if you say that all are elitist schools, then this is not true, because some charge low school fees, some target students with specific needs. Thirdly, in the process, one important criterion we look at is that they must be non-profit making. On utilization of resources, well, I have visited many DSS schools, and very often they need to raise funds to fulfill their other areas of education. Dr. Fernando Cheung. Now, our concern is that DSS schools will cause a wider wealth gap. Many traditional aided schools are gradually becoming DSS schools. And some schools, after turning into DSS schools, charge school fees of very low school fees, close to no fees at all. And those are left-wing schools. Whereas here we have a list of elitist schools: St. Paul's Secondary, St. Paul's Coeducational College, St. Stephen's Girls' College, etc. Their school fees range from 16,000 to 60,000 per year. You can't say that school fees are cheap. These are conventional, so-called elitist schools. St. Paul's, SSGC, their concerned groups have raised the issues, and the alumni and teachers all came out to speak out to protect the interests of their children and the children from grassroots families. Well, this is their concern. Of course, you say there are scholarships available, but according to the director of all this report, the operation is disappointing. And about enhancing the transparency of the school's financial management, for example, for St. Paul's St. Paul Secondary School. Now, the concerned group against its conversion into DSS expresses a concern, and that is whether the number of scholarships, the amount, the number of students getting the scholarship, and the respective amounts can be disclosed. This is very basic information, and we don't have such information. And there are still outstanding problems. So in terms of favoritism, we see that DSS schools are being favored. They get more resources so that they become more competitive. So before resolving, before you allow schools, can you resolve these problems before you allow aided schools to apply for converting into DSS? In fact, in 2011, the working group prepared 22 improvement measures, including the enhancement in transparency of financial positions. Now, many schools have already disclosed their financial positions, so the situation is much better than that a few months before. Next, Dr. Helena Wong. I'm more concerned about a number of issues. Just now, Secretary talked about some very good DSS aided schools, and we understand that they are facing great pressure, financially speaking, that can push them to applying for DSS schools so that they get more resources to recruit language teachers, for example. My concern is that after these schools are converted to DSS schools, they may charge a monthly school fee of a few $1,000s, so that you have segregation in our education, so that it's a step back in terms of free education. So a member suggested just now that you should not just review direct subsidy scheme schools, but also all schools, even aided schools, so that we understand whether it's a problem with lack of money, so that more money can be given to a particular school for children that receive good education. You're creating classes among the schools, and that's the biggest problem. The other point is to respond to the creation of classes, social classes. Now, you talked about scholarships given by DSS schools, and I've read the paper from the administration. I asked for figures concerning the scholarships available. None is available. No such figures are available. So this problem is outstanding. The other point is that apart from giving a block grant to DSS, the DSS schools can also charge school fees. Now, about enhancing the transparency of schools' financial management, that's in para 18. However, in 2010, the Director of Audit revealed that out of 73 DSS schools, 90% did not have a very transparent financial positions, and they have been asked to upload information concerning their financial statement and their financial position, etc. And still, these are outstanding problems. How can you resolve them? Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong. Well, I reiterate that the concerns expressed in the discussion a few months ago were noted, but I emphasize that the situation has improved after the review conducted by the working group towards the end of last year. All the information have been uploaded online. The statistics concerning scholarships are also available. We can do more, of course. Dr. Kenneth Chan. Now, Secretary, in his opening remarks, say that this is a report, but we're not asking for a report on the progress, but rather a review. The review was the discussion on a review started in the 80s and 90s, and it has been some time. There have been criticisms from the Director of Audit and from the community, and according to some media reports, some schools have not followed the EDB's requirements. Now, our stance is not to take action against them, but rather we need to look at the objectives. For example, to provide a diversity of schools, and whether the objectives are met. For example, we have a letter from the Hong Kong School of Principals and also the concerned group on the St. Stephen's Girls' College converting to DSS, and another concerned group of the St. Paul Secondary School also wrote in. Of course, there should be discussion. There should be views of the there should be different views, and my motion is very simple. This panel urges the Education Bureau to set up a select committee to immediately review DSS school policy and to conduct extensive public consultation. And before the review is concluded, the EDB should suspend all DSS school applications at once. This is arising from the motion debate of the Council last year. Originally, it was scheduled. Actually, the debate was carried out on the 24th of July, 2013, and we have covered all the points about DSS scheme, enrollment, and the impact on aided schools, and the transparency of DSS applications and consultation with stakeholders. All these should be covered by this extensive consultation. So I am working with Ms. Sit-ho in moving this motion this time, because even if this is not a binding motion, we feel there is certain support from the community on this issue. And there are DSS schools who feel aggrieved. And I think this extensive review would help them express their views. Of course, there are different types of DSS schools. Some are performing better, some are not. But I think the whole community is looking forward to a comprehensive review. Some other members, starting from Mr. Yip Kwok Him. Thank you, Chairman. Direct subsidy scheme schools was introduced in 1991. I need to declare that I'm also a responsible person of a school sponsoring body, and this school sponsoring body also runs a DSS school. Now, since its introduction, with the support of staff and resources given, the DSS schools have developed. Some have developed into very good schools, and it provides greater variety to students and more choices to parents.
There's this saying that diversification may lead to different social classes. I don't think I can accept this theory. Even the members from the opposition camp said that DSS schools have enrolled grassroots students. As for the management of DSS schools, their transparency, their financial management, etc., I think the Education Bureau is too harsh on DSS schools at the moment. There's pressure from the LegCo. There's also pressure from the public. Members should browse the websites of these DSS schools. Then they'll understand that DSS schools have been even more transparent than subvented schools. The motion suggests that a review be conducted. Well, any policy should be reviewed every now and then. Nobody will oppose that. As for the scope of consultation, Ms. Sit-ho said that there's already a consensus. If there's already a consensus, why do we need another motion? If there's already consensus in this council, why should we need this motion? And in the motion, there's this mention that before a review, the policy should be reviewed. Obviously, the honorable member opposes the DSS policy. Yes, we need more discussion, but under the existing DSS, sufficient protection has been offered to schools. For example, how many classes should be opened, etc., etc. Mrs. Regina Ip, Mr. Chairman, I have to declare that I'm a school manager of a grassroots DSS school in Sham Shui Po. Its English standard is low, but it focuses on nurturing the performing abilities of the students. And in Shamshui-po, some DSS schools have been serving ethnic minorities. We need diversification. Not all DSS schools are elite schools. Yes, DSS schools collect a higher tuition fee than subvented schools. But because independent international schools are collecting very costly tuition fees, so DSS schools offer another choice. Dr. Kenneth Chan said that many people opposed St. Paul Secondary School and St. Stephen's Girls' School being converted into DSS schools. But there are a lot of people who support that proposal. Some parents came to me to say that they want their children to have more diversified developments. Just now we discussed here, say, liberal studies, etc. Teachers and students have become much busier, and 5 bands have been converted into 3 bands, etc., etc. So I oppose any broad brush approach. It doesn't matter if you want a review. We need to have fee remission and scholarships for DSS schools. But we should not ban DSS schools totally, otherwise parents will be disappointed. Bureau Director, any response? Mr. Chairman, I accept members' views about diversification. DSS schools are very much diversified. But of course, at the same time, there is a need for them to continuously enhance themselves. Next, Ms. Tari Lee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also of the opinion that it is very important to provide diversified choices to parents. Well, let's set aside the traditional famous schools for a moment. We have to review and examine why DSS schools have become more and more popular among parents. Is it that their curricula and modus operandi are more attractive to parents? We should not just criticize DSS schools for fostering elitism. There's a higher degree of flexibility in DSS schools. For example, they can have smaller class sizes in the primary stage. For example, I believe dramas should be taught at the primary level. And then DSS schools also allow parents to have more choices in terms of medium of instruction. And then I visited a DSS school which runs an IB curricula. But that school is offering affordable IB courses to students. And the parents are still very dissatisfied with the class size of the IB courses. DSS schools provide diversification to parents. Only 9% of our schools are DSS schools at the moment. That's a very small percentage. Of course, some parents are very worried that traditional renowned schools will gradually become DSS schools. I don't think we should stop such schools from turning DSS totally. Well, I believe some traditional renowned schools have repositioned themselves and would like to become DSS schools. Perhaps we should review subvented schools and traditional renowned schools. Probably they are not providing adequate choices to parents. That's why they're not as competitive as DSS schools. We should also collect data on improvement measures adopted by such schools. Any such data, Bureau Director? Mr. Chairman, I sit on many committees. I don't actually see any strong views up to this moment. Just now, I said that we would extend our meeting to 6:45 p.m. But Mr. James Tan, Mr. Wong Kwok Heng, and Mr. Lam Tai Fai still want to speak. I'm replacing Mr. Ma Fong Kwok, who has left the conference room. I don't think we can finish by 6:45, so let's further extend the meeting to 7 p.m., but not beyond that. Is that all right? Sorry, the speaker is not coming through. Mr. Chairman, you already mentioned 6:45. That's why I'm asking you again, can we extend the meeting by another 15 minutes? Mr. Chairman, even if there is one opponent, you cannot implement your suggestion. Can we extend the meeting by 5 or 10 more minutes? I object, Mr. Chairman. I intended to sit till 6:45, and you're continuously asking us to stay on for longer. Should we take a vote first, then, Mr. Chairman? Well, members, I'm seeking your support for extending the meeting by 10 more minutes. I don't support you, Mr. Chairman. I'm afraid that a vote will only be taken after 7 p.m. Well, let's take a vote first. I oppose a further extension of 5 minutes. Well, I understand the rules of procedure. So long as we have one opponent, the motion will not be carried. Mr. Michael Tan, thank you very much. I'm a panel member. First of all, I have to declare that I'm the supervisor of a DSS school. We're not a DSS school converted from traditional renowned school. Parents support us. Let's look at this motion. I extremely oppose this motion, which uglify DSS schools. Just like Delia Memorial School, you must not block it from turning DSS. In fact, DSS schools may not be collecting very high tuition fees. I pose the motion. I have two questions for the Bureau Director. I very much support the DSS concept, that is to enhance education quality, to give extra resources to schools. At the same time, I'm extremely against elitism. What about those schools who fail to enroll sufficient students? The Education Bureau should work harder to make sure that these schools make full use of the 10%. Why are certain schools more successful? It's because they try to reach out to local communities. So recruitment exercises should be done with sufficient work. So it really depends on how hard schools work in the enrollment exercise. Secondly, schools should set targets for themselves. 15% for fee remission. That is to guard against DSS schools turning elite. And the government should complement the discrepancy on the basis of the per capita difference. St. Paul's Co-Educational School, for example, they've done a lot of good things. Should you not give them some assistance? In the long run, I don't mind increasing the 15% to 20%. Anyway, you must not allow DSS schools to become elite schools. Bureau Director? I don't think we should label DSS schools as elite schools. In fact, they are not. As regards greater strength, I have to say that for all of these DSS schools, a 10% scholarship rate had been attained. We have to complete our agenda items. 3 minutes, Mr. Wong Kok Heng. Mr. Chairman, I don't need 3 minutes. First of all, I have to declare that I'm a school manager of a DSS institution, which serves the grassroots. We're a grassroots education institution. Very often, this institution lacks funds and has to raise funds separately. So, we must not uglify these DSS schools. We should try to understand their circumstances in depth. In fact, these schools also encounter difficulties. We should give them sufficient assistance so that they can play their roles and functions to the full. So please do not uglify these schools. Don't adopt a broad brush approach either. You should be realistic. You should support them such that they can honor their roles and functions. Thank you. Well, I don't think we can take a vote. I have to finish at 6:45 p.m. because members oppose any further extension. Together with the Deputy Chairman, I'll examine Dr. Kenneth Chan's motion as amended by Mr. To, and I'll make an announcement at the next meeting. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.